Anybody excited? But last week we left off on a rather forceful cliffhanger. The mad musician had set up some sort of contraption involving a violin and resonance in such a way that buildings were crumbling to nothing for seemingly no apparent reason. And that's bad, to put it lightly. And the madman, last we left off, tried to throw our intrepid hero to the street below, and they were battling on the edge of the building's roof. So now we return to our story. So let's begin. The mind of the engineer was still working clearly, but a wild fear gripped his heart. His strength seemed to be leaving him. The madman pushed him back, bending his spine with brute strength. Teddy was forced to the narrow ledge that had given the two men footing, and the fingers of the madman gripped his throat. He was dimly conscious that the swaying of the building was slowing down. His reason told him that Linan had found the wall socket and stopped the sawing of the devil's bow on its engine of hell. He saw the madman draw a big knife. With his last remaining strength, he reached out and grasped the wrist above the hand which held the weapon. In spite of all he could do, he saw the madman inching the knife nearer and nearer his throat. Grim death was peering into the bulging eyes of Teddy Jenks when his engineering knowledge came to his rescue. He remembered the top stories of the Acme building were constructed with a step of 10 feet in from the street line for every store of construction above the 24th floor. If we fall, he reasoned, we can really only fall one story. Then he deliberately rolled his own body in the weight of the madman who held him over the edge of the coping. At the same time, he twisted the madman's wrists so the point of the knife pointed to the madman's body, rather than his own. There was a dim consciousness of a painful impact. Teddy had fallen underneath, but the force of the two bodies coming together had thrust the knife deep into the entrails of the mad musician. Clouds which had been collecting in the sky began a splattering downpour. The storm grew in fury, and lightning tore the heavens, while thunder boomed and crackled, and the rain began falling in sheets. This served to revive the unconscious Teddy. He painfully withdrew his body from under that of the madman, and the falling rain, stained with the blood of the mad musician, trickled over the edge of the building. Teddy dragged himself through a window and passed his hand over his forehead, which was aching miserably. He tried to get to his feet and fell back, only to try again. Several times he tried, and then, his strength returning, was able to walk. He made his way to the studio where he had left Linan, and found them there, surrounded by police, reporters, and others. The infernal machine had been rendered harmless, but was kept intact as evidence. Catching sight of Teddy, Linan shouted with joy. "I stopped the thing," shouted a police schoolboy. Then, observing Teddy's exhausted condition, he asked him, "Why, you look like you've been to a funeral." "Well, I have," said Teddy. "You'll find that crazy fiddler dead on the 29th story. Look out the window of the 30th story," he instructed the police, who had started to recover the body. "He stabbed himself. He's either dead or dying." And it proved that he was dead. No engineering firm is responsible for the actions of a madman, after all. So the Muller Construction Company was given a clean bill of health. Jenks and Elaine Linan were with the girl's father in his study. They were asking for the paternal blessing, and Linan was pretending to be hard to convince. "Now, my daughter, this young man takes $500 of my good money by sounding me out, as he calls it. Then he comes along and tries to take my daughter away from me. It's positively high-handed. It dates back to the football game." "Oh, dear, don't be like that," said Elaine, who was on the arm of his chair with her own arms around him. "I tell you, Elaine, this dates back to the fall of 1927. It dates back to the fall of Eve. When a girl finds her man, no power can keep him
farmer. If you won't give me to Teddy Jenks, I'll elope with him.
Well, all right then, said Manon as he turned toward his radio set. 1 and 1 makes 1, said Teddy Jenks. Every engineer knows his mathematics. That was a rather unsurprising that was a rather intense resolution to the last week's cliffhanger. And hey, if you don't know what's going on because you weren't here last week, I have a YouTube channel that has every single episode of this archived. They go up Saturdays. Go check out Glacier Nestor after the show today if you want to figure out just what the Mad Musician's deal was. Why was he attacking our intrepid hero? What was he doing? Why was the building collapsing? Figure out just who this Elaine character is that had been swooning over our main character. Anyway, let us move on to the next story. That being The Thief of Time by Captain S.P. Meek. That sounds like a pseudonym if I've ever heard one. Harvey Winston, paying teller of the First National Bank of Chicago, stripped the band from a bundle of $20 bills, counted out 17 of them, and added them to the pile on the counter before him. 1,231 tenths, he read from the payroll change slips before him. The paymaster at the Kramer Packing Company nodded in assent, and Winston turned to the stacked bills in his rear currency rack. He picked up a handful of bundles and turned back to the grill. And his gaze swept the counter where a moment before he'd stacked the 20s, and his jaw dropped. Have you got those 20s, Mr. Trier? Got 'em? I of course not. How could I? There they are. His voice trailed off as he looked at the empty counter. I must have dropped them, said Winston as he turned. He glanced back at the rear rack where his main stock of currency was piled, and he stood paralyzed for a moment, then reached under the counter and pushed a button. The bank resounded instantly. The clangor of gongs and huge steel grills shot into place with a clang, sealing all doors and preventing anyone from entering or leaving the bank. Guards sprang to their stations with drawn weapons, and from the inner offices the bank officials came swarming out. The cashier, followed by 2 men, hurried to the paying teller's cage. What is it, Mr. Winston? I've been robbed. Who by? How? I don't know, sir. I was counting out Mr. Try's payroll, and after I'd stacked the 20s, I returned to get the 10s, and when I turned back, the 20s were gone. Well, where had they gone? I don't know, sir. Mr. Tryer was surprised as I was, and then I turned back, thinking that I'd knocked him off the counter, and I saw at a glance that there was a huge hole in my back rack, so you can see yourself, sir. The cashier turned to the paymaster. Is this a practical joke, Mr. Tryer? Of course not. Winston's grill was closed. It still is. Granted, I might have reached the 20s that he piled up. How could I have gone through a grill and taken the rest of the missing money without his seeing me? The money disappeared almost instantly. It was there a moment before. I noticed when Winston took the 20s from his rack that it was full. But someone must have taken it. Money doesn't walk off of its own accord or vanish into thin air. A bell interrupted his speech. There are the police. I'll let them in. The smaller of the 2 men who had followed the cashier from his office when the alarm had sounded stepped forward and spoke quietly. His voice was low and well-pitched, yet it carried a note of authority and power that held his auditor's attention while he spoke. The voice harmonized with the man. The most noticeable point about him was the inconspicuousness of his voice and manner, and yet there was a glint of steel in his gray eyes that told of an enormous force. I don't believe that I'd let them in for a few moments, Rogers. I think that we were up against something a little different from the usual bank robbery. But, Mr. Carnes, we must call the police in a case like this, and the sooner they take charge, the better chance there's going to be of apprehending the thief. Well, suit yourself, replied the little man with a shrug of his shoulders. I merely offered my advice. Will you take charge, Mr. Carnes? I can't supersede the local authorities in a case like this. The Secret Service is primarily interested in the suppression of counterfeiting, and the
enforcement of certain federal statutes, but I'll be glad to assist the local authorities to the best of my ability, provided they desire my help. My advice to you would be to keep out the patrolmen who are demanding admittance, and get in touch with the chief of police. I would ask that his best detective be sent here, together with an expert fingerprint photographer, before anyone else is admitted. If the patrolmen are allowed to wipe their hands over Mr. Winston's counter, they may destroy valuable evidence. You're right, Mr. Carnes. Mr. Jervis, will you tell the police there's no violence threatening and ask them to wait for a few minutes? I'll telephone the chief of police at once. As the cashier hurried away to his telephone, Carnes turned to his companion, who stood an interested, although silent, spectator of the scene. His companion was a marked contrast to the Secret Service operator. He stood well over 6 feet in height, and his protruding jaw and shock of unruly black hair combined with his massive shoulders and chest to give him the appearance of a man who labored with his hands until one looked at them. His hands were in very strange contrast to the rest of him. Long, slim, mobile hands they were, with tapering, nervous fingers, the hands of a thinker or a musician. Telltale splotches of acid told of hours spent in a laboratory, a tale that was confirmed by the almost imperceptible stoop of his shoulders, probably worn by a great many hours at a microscope. Do you agree with my advice, Mr. Bird? The noted scientist, who from his laboratory in the Bureau of Standards had sent forth many new things in the realm of chemistry and physics, and who incidentally had been instrumental in solving some of the most baffling mysteries which the Secret Service has been called upon to face, grunted.
Well, it didn't do any harm, but it's rather a waste of time. The thief wore gloves.
Well, how in the world do you know that? Merely common sense.
A man who can do what he can do, at least had some rudiments of intelligence. And even the feeble-minded crooks know enough to wear gloves nowadays. Another reason I didn't want.
Carnes stepped a little closer to the doctor. Another reason I didn't want patrolmen tramping around is if Winston gave the alarm quickly enough, the thief's probably still in the building.
He's probably a good many miles away by now,
replied Dr. Bird, with a shrug of his shoulders. Carnes' eyes opened wildly. What? How? Who? Do you have any idea of who did it or how it was done?
Possibly, I have an idea,
replied Dr. Bird, with a smile.
My advice to you, Carnes, is to keep away from the local authorities as much as possible. I want to be present when Winston and Trier are in question, and I may possibly wish to ask a few questions myself.
Use your authority that far, but no further. Don't volunteer any information, and especially don't let my name get out. We'll drop the counterfeiting case we were summoned here on, and look into this a little, on our own hook. I still want your aid, so don't get tied up with the police. Add that we don't want the police crossing our trail at every turn.
They won't. We'll never get any evidence on this case if I'm right, and neither will we, for the present.
The stunt is to lie low and wait for the next attempt of the nature, and thus accumulate some evidence, and some idea of where to look. And how do you know there's going to be another attempt?
Surely. There must be. You don't expect a man who got away with a crime like this to quit operations just because a few flat feet went around making a hullabaloo about it, do ya? I may be wrong in my assumption, but if I'm right, the most important thing is to keep all reference to my name or position out of the press reports.
The cashier hastened up to them. Detective Captain Sturdivant will be here in a few minutes with a photographer and a couple other men. Is there anything else we can do in the meantime, Mr. Carnes?
I would suggest that Mr. Trier and his guard and Mr. Winston go into your office.
My assistant and I would like to be present during the questioning, if there's no objection to that. I didn't know you had an assistant with you. Carnes indicated Dr. Berger. This gentleman is Mr. Berger, my assistant. Do you understand? Well, certainly. I'm sure there will be no objection to your presence, Mr. Carnes, replied the cashier as he led his way to the office. A few minutes later, Detective Captain Sturdivant. Gosh, that's quite the name. A few minutes later, Detective Captain Sturdivant of the Chicago Police was announced. He acknowledged the introductions gruffly and got down to business at once. What were the circumstances of the robbery? Winston told his story, Trier and the guard confirming it. Pretty thin, snorted the detective when they'd finished. He whirled suddenly on Winston. Where'd you hide the loot? Why, what do you mean? Just what I said. Where'd you hide the loot? I didn't hide it anywhere. It was stolen. You'd better think up a better one. If you think you can make me believe that money was stolen from you in broad daylight with two men in plain sight of you who didn't see it, you might as well just get over it. I know you've got some hiding place where you slip the stuff, and the quicker you come clean and spill it, the better it'll be for you. Where'd you hide it? I didn't hide it. Mr. Trier can tell you. I didn't touch it from the time I laid it down until he turned back. That's right. He turned his back on me for a moment. When he turned back, it was gone. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. That's right. He turned his back on me for a moment. When he turned back, it was gone.
Just need to get some water so I'm not coughing further.
So you're in on it too? What do you mean? Oh, nothing at all. Of course Winston didn't touch it, and it disappeared, and you never saw it go, even though you were within 3 feet of it all the time. Did you see anything? He demanded of the guard.
Not that I'm sure of. I thought a shadow passed in front of me for a second, but when I looked again, it was gone.
Dr. Bird sat forward suddenly. The shadow.
Well, it wasn't exactly a shadow. It was like if a person passed suddenly before me so quickly I couldn't see him. It felt like somebody was there, but I didn't really rightly see anything.
Did you notice anything of the sort? Demanded the doctor of Trier, rather. Well, I don't know. Now that Williams mentioned it, I did feel a breath of air or emotion as if something passed in front of me. I mean, I didn't think of it at the time.
Was this shadow opaque enough to even momentarily obscure your vision?
Nothing I was conscious of. It was just a breath of air, like something passing by very rapidly.
What made you ask Trier if he had the money when you turned around?
Asked the doctor of Winston.
Say, who the devil are you, and what do you mean by breaking into my examination and stopping it? Carnes tossed a leather wallet on the table.
These are my credentials. I am a chief of one section of the United States Secret Service, as you will see, and this is Mr. Berger, my assistant. We were in the bank engaged on a counterfeiting case when the robbery took place. We've had a good deal of experience along these lines, and we are merely anxious to aid you.
Sertivant examined Carnes' credentials carefully and then returned them. This is a Chicago robbery, and we've had a little experience in robberies and are apprehending robbers ourselves. I think we can get along without your help just fine.
You've had more experience with robberies than with apprehending robbers, if the papers tell the truth.
The detective's face flushed. That'll be enough from you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. If you open your mouth again, I'll arrest you as a material witness and a possible accomplice.
That sounds like Chicago methods,
Said Carnes.
Now listen to me, Captain. My assistant and I are merely trying to assist you in this case. If you don't desire our assistance, we'll proceed along our own lines without interfering. But in the meantime, remember, this is a national bank, that our questions will be answered. The United States is higher than even the Chicago police force, and I'm here under orders to investigate a counterfeiting case. If I so desire, I can seal the doors of this bank and allow no one in or out until I have the evidence I desire. Do you understand?
Sertivant sprang to his feet with an oath. For the sight of the gold badge which Carnes displayed stopped him. Oh, well, I suppose that no harm will overcome of letting Winston answer your fool questions, but I'll warn you that I'll report to Washington you're interfering with the course of justice and using your authority to aid the getaway of a criminal.
Well, that's your privilege.
Mr. Winston, will you answer Mr. Berger's question? Well, I asked him because he was right close to the money, and I thought that he might have reached through the wicket and picked it up. Then, too, he hesitated for a moment, and Dr. Bird smiled encouragingly.
What else?
Well, I can't exactly tell. It just seemed to me that I heard the rustle the bills make when they're pulled across the counter. When I heard them gone, I thought he might have taken them. Then when I turned toward him, I seemed to hear the rustle of bills behind me, even though I knew I was alone in the cage. When I looked back, the money was gone.
Did you see or hear anything? Like a shadow or a person moving?
No. Yes, I don't know. But just as I turned around, it seemed to me the rear door of my cage had moved. It might have been a shadow for an instant. I'm just not sure. I don't know. I hadn't thought of it before.
How long after did you ring the alarm?
Not over a second or two.
That's all.
If your high and mightiness has no further questions to ask, perhaps you'll let me ask a few, said Sternfart.
Go ahead, ask all you wish,
Replied Bird with a laugh.
I have all the information I desire here for the present. I may want to ask other questions later, but for now I think we'll be going.
If you find any strange fingerprints on Winston's counter, I'll be glad to have them compared with our files, said Carnes. I'm not bothering with fingerprints. This is an open and shut case. There'd be lots of Winston's fingerprints there, for that matter, and no others. There isn't the slightest doubt this is an inside case, and I have the men I want right here. Mr. Rogers, your bank is closed for today. Everyone in it will be searched, and then those not needed to close up will be sent away. I'll get a squad of men to go over your building and locate the hiding place. Your money is still on the premises unless these men slipped to a Confederate who got out before the alarm was given. I'll question the guards about that. If that happened, a little sweating will get it out of them. And you're going to arrest me? demanded Trier in surprise. Yes, dearie. I'm going to arrest you and your two little playmates if these Washington experts will allow me to. You'll save a lot of time and quite a few painful experiences if you come clean now instead of later. I demand to see my lawyer and communicate with my firm. Time enough for that when I'm through with you. He turned to Carnes. Have I your gracious permission to arrest these three criminals?
Yes, indeed, Captain,
Replied Carnes sweetly. You have my gracious permission to make just as big a fool of yourself as you wish. We're going. By the way, Captain, said Dr. Bird as he followed Carnes out, when you get through playing with your prisoners and start to look for the thief, use a tip. Look for a left-handed man who has a thorough knowledge of chemistry and especially toxicology. Well, it's easy enough to see that he was left-handed, that he pulled the money out through the grill from the positions occupied by Trier and his guard, but what's making you suspect chemistry knowledge and toxicology knowledge for that? Asked Carnes as he and the doctor left the bank.
Merely a shrewd guess, my dear Watson, replied the doctor. I'm likely to be wrong, but there's a good chance, however, that I'm right. I'm judging solely from the method used.
You've solved the method? Demanded Carnes in amazement. What on earth was it? The more I thought about it, the more inclined I am to believe that Sturtevant's right, that it's an inside job. It seems to me that it's impossible a man could have entered in broad daylight, lifted that money in front of 3 men, within sight of 100 more, without someone getting a glimpse of it. He must have taken the money out in a grip or a sack or something like that, but the bank record shows no one but Trier entered with a grip, and no one left with a package for 10 minutes before Trier entered. There may be something to what you say, Carnes, but I'm inclined to have a different idea. I don't think it's the usual run of bank robbery. I'd rather not hazard a guess just yet. I'm going back to Washington tonight. Before I go any further in the matter, I need some rather specialized knowledge that I don't possess, and I want to consult with Dr. Knowles. I'll be back in a week or so, and then we can look into that counterfeiting case after we deal with this.
What am I to do?
Sit around the lobby of your hotel, eat 3 meals a day, read the papers. If you get bored, I recommend you pay a visit to the Arts Institute, maybe perhaps admire the graceful lions which adorn the steps. Artistic contemplations may well improve your culture.
All right. I'll assume a pensive air and mooned lions, but I might do better if you told me what I was looking for.
You're looking for knowledge, my dear Collins. Remember the saying of the sages, to the wise man no knowledge is useless. The huge Martin bomber rolled down to a landing at the Maywood Air Dome, and a burly figure descended from the rear cockpit and waved his hand jovially to the waiting Carnes. The Secret Service man hastened over to greet his colleague. Have you got that truck I wired you to have ready?
Well, it's waiting at the entrance, but I've got some good news for you first.
It can wait. Get a detail of men to help us unload this ship. Some of the cases are pretty heavy. Carnes hurried off and returned with a gang of laborers, who took from the bomber a dozen heavy packaging cases of various sizes, several of them labeled either fragile or inflammable in large type.
Where do they go, Doctor?
To the First National Bank. And Casey here goes with him. You know Casey, don't you, Carnes? He's the best photographer in the Bureau.
Should I go along too?
Asked Carnes as he acknowledged the introduction. No need for it. I wired Roger, said he knows the stuff's coming and what to do with it. Unpack as soon as you get there, Casey, and start setting up as soon as the bank closes.
All right, Doctor,
replied Casey as he mounted the truck beside the driver.
Where do we go, Doctor?
Asked Carnes as the truck rolled off. To the Blackstone Hotel for a bath and some clean clothes. And what's the news you have for me?
The news is this, Doctor. I carried out your instructions diligently, and during the daylight hours, the lions have not moved.
Dr. Bird looked contrite. I beg your pardon, Carnes. I really didn't think when I left you so mystified how you must have felt. Believe me, I had my own reasons, excellent reasons, for the secrecy.
I've usually been able to maintain silence when asked to,
replied Carnes stiffly. My dear fellow, I didn't mean to question your discretion. I know that whatever I tell you is safe, but there are angles to this affair that are so strange and improbable that I don't dare to trust my own conclusions, let alone share them. I'll tell you all about it soon. Did you get those tickets I wired for?
Well, of course, but what have 2 tickets to the AAU track this afternoon got to do with a bank robbery?
One trouble with you, Carnes, replied the doctor with a judicial air, is that you have no idea of the importance of proper relaxation. Is it possible that you have no desire to see Ladd, this new marvel who is smashing records left and right run? He performs for the Illinois Athletic Club this afternoon. It wouldn't surprise me to see him lower the world's record again. He already lowered the record for the 100-yard dash from 9 3/5 to 8 4/5. There's no telling what he'll do.
Are we going to waste the whole afternoon just to watch a man run?
You'll see many men run, my dear fellow. But there's only one in whom I have a deep abiding interest, and that's Mr. Ladd. Have you got your binoculars with you?
No.
Then, by all means, beg, borrow, or steal 2 pairs before this afternoon. We might easily miss half the fun without them. Are seats near the starting line for the sprints?
Yes, the big demand was for seats near the finish line.
The start will be much more interesting, Carnes. I was somewhat of a minor star in track myself in my college days. It'll be the greatest interest to me to observe the starting form of this new speed artist. Now, Carnes, don't ask any more questions. I may be barking up the wrong tree, and I don't want to give you a chance to laugh at me. I'll tell you what to watch for at the track. The sprinters lined up on the 100-yard mark, and Dr. Bird and Carnes sat with their glasses glued to their eyes, watching the slim figure in the colors of the Illinois Athletic Club, whose large 62 on his back identified him as the new star. Whose large 62 on his back identified him as the new star. On your mark. Get set. Oh, did you see that, Carnes? The starting gun cracked, and the runners were off in their short grind. The lad leapt in a lead and rapidly distanced the field, his legs twinkling under him almost faster than the eye could follow. He was fully 20 yards in the lead when his speed suddenly lessened, and the balance of the runners closed the gap he had opened. His lead was too great for them, however, and he was still a good 10 yards in the lead when he crossed the tape. The official time was posted as 8 and 9/10 seconds. Another 30 yards and he'd have been beaten. That's the way he's run all his races. He piles up a huge lead at first, and loses a good deal at the finish. His speed doesn't hold up. Never mind that, though. It's only an additional point in my favor. Did you notice his jaw just before the gun went? Well, they seemed to clench, and then he swallowed, but most of them do something like that. Watch him carefully for the next heat. See if he puts something into his mouth. That's the important thing. Dr. Bird sank into a brown study and paid no attention to the next few events, but he came to attention promptly when the final heat of the 100-yard dash was called. With his glasses, he watched Lad closely as the runner trotted up to the starting line. There, Carnes, did you see? Well, I saw him wipe his mouth. All right, now watch his jaws just before the gun goes. The final heat was a duplicate of the first preliminary. Ladd took an early lead, which he held for 3/4 of the distance to the tape, and then his pace slackened, and he finished only a bare 10 yards ahead of the next runner. This time, he tied the previous world record of 8 4/5 seconds. Well, he definitely crunched and swallowed all right, Doctor. And that's what I wanted to be sure of. Now, Carnes, here's something for you to do. Get a hold of the United States Commissioner, get a John Doe warrant, and go back to the hotel with it, and wait for me. I may phone you at any minute, and I may not. If I don't, wait in your room until you hear from me, and don't leave it for a minute. Where are you going, Doctor? I'm going down to congratulate Mr. Ladd. An old track man like me can't let such an opportunity pass. I don't know what this is all about, Doctor. I know you well enough to obey orders and keep my mouth shut until it's my turn to speak. Few men could resist Dr. Bird when he set out to make a favorable impression, and even a world champion is apt to be flattered by the attention of one of the greater scientists of his day, especially when that scientist has made an enviable reputation as an athlete in his college days, and can speak the jargon of the champion's particular sport. Henry Ladd promptly capitulated to the charm of the doctor and allowed him to be led away to sup at Bird's club. The supper passed off pleasantly, and when the doctor requested an interview with the young athlete in a private room, he gladly consented. They entered the room together, remained for an hour and a half, and then came out. The smile had left Ladd's face, and he appeared nervous and distracted. The doctor talked cheerfully with him and kept a firm grip on his arm as they descended the stairs together. They entered a telephone booth where the doctor made a few calls and then descended the street where they entered a taxi. Maywood Aerodrome, the doctor told the driver. 2 hours later, the big Martin bomber, which had carried the doctor to Chicago, roared away into the night, and Bird turned back, re-entered the taxi, and headed for the city alone. When Carnes received the telephone call, which was one of those the doctor made from the booth at his club, he hurried over to the First National Bank. His badge secured him an entrance, and he found Casey busily engaged in rigging up an elaborate piece of apparatus on one of the balconies where the guards would normally station during banking hours. Dr. Bird said to tell you to keep on the job all night if necessary. He thinks you'll need your machine tomorrow. I'll have it ready to turn on the power at 4 a.m. Carnes watched him curiously for a while as he soldered together the electrical connections and assembled an apparatus which looked like a motion picture projector. What are you setting up? It's a high-speed motion picture camera with a telescopic lens. It's a piece of apparatus which Dr. Bird designed while he was in Washington last week. I made it from his sketches, using some apparatus we had on hand. It's certainly a dandy. What's so special about it? The speed. Do you know how fast an ordinary movie is taken? No? Well, it's 16 exposures per second. The slow pictures are taken sometimes at 128 or 256 exposures per second, and then shown at 16. This affair will take 500,000 pictures per second. I didn't know a film would register with such an exposure. That's slow. It all depends on the light. The best flash powder gives a flash about 1/10,000th of a second in duration. That's by no means the speed limit of the film. The only trouble is enough light and sufficient shutter speed. Pictures have been taken by means of spark photography with an exposure of less than 3/1,000,000th of a second. The whole secret of this machine lies in the shutter. The big disc with the slots in the edge is set up before the lens and run at such a speed that 500,000 slots per second pass before the lens. The film, which is 16mm X-ray film, travels behind the lens at a speed of nearly 5 miles per second. It has to be gradually worked up to this speed, and after the whole thing's set up, it takes it nearly 4 hours to get to full speed. At that speed, it must take 1,000,000 miles of film before you get up steam. It would if the film were being exposed. There's only about 100 yards of film all told, which will run over these huge drums and in this belt. There's a regular camera shutter working on an electric principle which remains closed. When the switch is tripped, the shutter stays open in about 230,000th of a second, stays open just 1/100th of a second, and then closes. This is time enough to expose nearly all the film. When we have the picture, I shut the current down, start applying a magnetic brake, and let it slow down. It takes over an hour to stop it without breaking the film. It sounds complicated, but it works all right. And where's the switch? That's the trick part of it. It's a remote control affair. The shutter opens and starts the machine taking pictures when the back door of the paying teller's cage is open 1/2 inch. There's also a hand switch in the line that can be opened so you can open the door without setting off the camera if you wish. When the hand switch is closed and the door opened, this is what happens. The shutter on the camera opens. The machine takes 5,000 pictures during the next 100th of a second, and then the shutter closes. Those 5,000 exposures will take about 5 minutes to show at the usual rate of 16 per second. Well, you said you had to get plenty of light. How are you managing that? The camera is equipped with a special lens ground out of rock crystal. This lens lets in ultraviolet light, which ordinary lenses shut out, an X-ray film, which is especially sensitive to ultraviolet light. In order to be sure we get enough illumination, I set up those 2 ultraviolet floodlights to illumine the cage. The teller will have to wear glasses to protect his eyes, and he'll get a little sunburned. But something has to be sacrificed to science, as Dr. Bird tells me. That's way over my head, said Carnes with a sigh. Can I do anything to help? The doctor told me to stand by and do anything I could. Well, I may be able to use you a little if you can use tools. You can start bolting together that light-proof shield if you want. And then some time passed. Well, Mr. Carnes, did you have an instructive night? Asked Dr. Bird cheerfully as he entered the First National Bank at 8:30 the next morning. I don't see that I did much good, Doctor. Casey would have had the machine ready on time anyway, and I'm no machinist. Well, frankly, Carnes, I didn't expect you to be much help to him, but I did want you to see what Casey was doing, and a little of it was pretty heavy for him to handle alone. I suppose that everything's ready? The motor reached full speed about 15 minutes ago, and Casey went out to get a cup of coffee. You mind telling me the object of this whole thing? Not at all. I plan to make a permanent record of the world of the most ingenious bank robber in the world. I hope he keeps his word. How do you mean? 3 days ago, when Sturdivant sweated a confession out of poor Winston, the bank got a message that a robbery would be repeated this morning, and dared them to prevent it. Rogers thought it was a hoax, but he telephoned me, and I worked the bureauman night and day to get my camera ready in time for it. I'm afraid that I can't do much to prevent the robbery, but I might be able to take a picture of it and thus prevent other cases of a like nature. Was the warning written? No, it was telephoned from a pay station in the Loop District. By the time it was traced and men got there, the telephoner was probably a mile away. He said he'd robbed the cage, in the same manner as he did before. Aren't you taking any special precautions? Well, yes, the bank is putting on extra guards and making a lot of fuss of that sort, probably to the great amusement of the robber. Why not close the cage for a day? Then he'd rob a different one, and we'd have no way of photographing his actions. To be sure, we'll put dummy money there, bundles with bills on the outside and paper on the inside. So even if I don't get a picture of him, you won't get much. Every bill in the cage will be marked as well. Did he say at what time he'd operate? No, he didn't, so we'll have to stand by all day. Oh, Casey, is everything all right? As sweet as chocolate candy, Doctor. I've tested it out thoroughly. Unless we have to run it so long that the film wears out and breaks, we're sitting pretty. If I don't get the pictures you're looking for, I'm a dodo. I haven't been called that yet. Good work, Casey. Keep the bearings oiled, and pray that the film doesn't break. The bank had been opened only 10 minutes, when the clangor of gongs announced a robbery. It was practically a duplicate of the first. The paying teller had turned from his window to take some bills from the rack, and found several dozens of bundles missing. As the gong sounded, Dr. Bird and Casey left the camera. She snapped, Doctor, cried Casey as he threw 2 switches. It'll take an hour to stop and half a day to develop the film, but I ought to be able to show you what we got by tonight. Well, that's good enough. Go ahead while I try and calm down the bank officials. Will you have everything ready by 8 o'clock? Easily, Doctor, replied Casey as he turned to the magnetic brake. By 8 o'clock, quite a crowd had assembled in the private room of the Blackstone Hotel. Besides Dr. Bird and Carnes, Rogers and several other officials of the First National Bank were present, together with Detective Captain Sturdivant and a group of the most prominent scientists and physicians gathered from the schools of the city. Gentlemen, said Dr. Bird when they had all taken seats facing a miniature moving picture screen on one wall, tonight I expect to show you some pictures which will, I'm sure, astonish you. It marks the advent of a new departure in transcendental medicine. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may wish to ask and to explain the pictures after they're shown. But before we start a discussion, I'll ask that you examine what I have to show you. Lights out, please. He stepped to the rear of the room as the light went out, and as his eyes grew used to the dimness of the room, he moved forward and took a vacant seat. His hand fumbled in his pocket for a second. Now, in the momentary silence which followed his cry, 2 dull metallic clicks could be heard, and a quick cry that was suddenly strangled, as Bird clamped his hand over the mouth of the man who sat between him and Carnes. All right, Casey, called the doctor. The whir of a projection machine could be heard, and on the screen before them leapt a picture of the paying teller's cage of the First National Bank. Winston's successor was standing motionless at the wicket, his lips parted in a smile. The attention of all was riveted on a figure who moved to the back of the cage. As the picture started, the figure was bent over an open suitcase, stuffing into it bundles of bills. He straightened up and reached to the rack for more bills, and as he did so, he faced the camera full for a moment. He picked up other bundles of bills, filled the suitcase, fastened it in a leisurely manner, opened the rear door of the cage, and walked out. Again, please, run it again, and stop when he faces its fall. The picture was repeated and stopped at the point indicated. Lights on, please. The lights flashed on, and Dr. Bird rose to his feet, pulling up after him the wilted figure of a middle-aged man. Gentlemen, allow me to present to you Professor James Kirkwood of the faculty of the Richton University, formerly known as James Collier of the Bureau of Standards and robber of the First National Bank. Detective Captain Sturdivant jumped to his feet and cast a searching glance at the captive. Well, he's the man, all right. Hang on to him until I get a wagon here. Oh, shut up. He's under the federal arrest just now, charged with the possession of narcotics. When we're through with him, you can have him if you want him. How did you get that picture, Doctor? I watched that cage every minute during the morning, and I swear that man never entered and stole the money, like the picture shows, unless he somehow managed to make himself invisible. Well, you're closer to the truth than you suspect, Mr. Rogers. But it's not a matter of invisibility, but something pretty close to it. A matter of catalysts. What matter of cats? Not cats, Mr. Rogers, catalysts. Catalysts are the name of a chemical reaction, consisting essentially of decomposition in a new combination of affected by the means of this catalyst, which acts on the compound bodies in question. But what goes through the reaction itself unchanged. There are a great many of them which are used in arts and manufacturing. Their actions not clearly understood, but the results are always well known and can be banked on. One of the commonest instances of the use of a catalyst is the use of sponge platinum and the manufacture of sulfuric acid. I'll not burden you with the details of the contact process, but the combination is effected by means of finely divided platinum, which is neither changed, consumed, or wasted during the process. There's a number of other catalysts known, for instance, iron in reactions in which metallic magnesium is concerned. The commonest are metals of the platinum group. Less is known of the actions of the catalysts in the organic reactions, but it's been the subject of intensive study by Dr. Knowles of the Bureau of Standards for several years. He studies the effect of different colored lights, that is, rays of different wavelengths, on the reactions which constitute growth in plants. They've had a great effect on how hothouse forcing of plants promised to revolutionize the truck gardening industry. He sped up the rate of growth so high as to 10 times the normal rate in some cases. A few years ago, he and his assistant, James Collier, turned their attention toward discovering a catalyst which would do for the metabolic reactions in animal life what his light ray experiments did for plants. What his method was, I won't disclose for obvious reasons, but suffice it to say that he met with great success. He took a puppy and by treating it with catalytic drugs, made it grow to maturity, pass through its entire normal lifespan, and die of old age in 6 months.
Well, that's all very interesting science, Doctor, but what bearing does it have on this robbery?
Mr. Rogers, how on a dark day in the absence of a timepiece would you judge the passage of time?
Well, I suppose by my stomach.
Exactly, by your metabolic rate. You eat a meal, it digests, you expend the energy which you've taken into your system, your stomach becomes empty, and your system demands more energy. You're hungry, and you judge that some 5 or 6 hours ago you must have passed since you ate. Follow?
Well, certainly.
Let us suppose that by some means of some tonic, some catalytic drug, for example, your rate of metabolism and also your rate of expenditure of energy is increased 6-fold. You'd eat a meal, and in an hour you'd be hungry again. Having no timepiece, and assuming that you were in a light-proof room, you'd judge that some 5 hours had passed, would you not?
Well, I expect so.
Very well. Now suppose this accelerated rate of digestion expenditure of energy continued. You'd be asleep in perhaps 3 hours, sleep about an hour and a quarter, and then would wake ready for breakfast. In other words, you'd live through a day in 4 hours.
Well, all right, but what advantage would that lend me?
None from your standpoint. It would, however, increase the rate of reproduction of cattle greatly. It might be a great boon to agriculture, but we'll not discuss that. Suppose it were possible to increase your rate of metabolism and expenditure of energy, in other words, your rate of living, not 6 times, but 30,000 times. In such a case, you'd live 5 minutes in 1/100th of a second.
Naturally, and you'd live a year in about 17.5 minutes, and a normal lifespan of 70 years and 20 hours. You'd be off as badly as a common mayfly.
Agreed, but suppose that you could so regulate the dose of your catalyst that its effect would last for only 1/100th of a second. During that short period of time, you'd be able to do the work that would ordinarily take you 5 minutes. In other words, you could enter a bank, pack a satchel with currency, and walk out. You'd be working in a leisurely manner, yet your actions would have been so quick that no human eye could have detected them. This is my theory of what actually took place. For verification, I'll turn to Dr. Kirkwood, as he prefers to be known now.
I don't know how you got that picture. What you said is about right.
I got that picture by using a speed of 30,000 times the normal 16 exposures per second. That figure I got from Dr. Knowles, the man who perfected the secret you stole when you left the Bureau 3 years ago. You secured only part of it, and I suppose it took all your time since to perfect and complete it. You gave yourself away when you experimented on young lad. I was a track man myself in my college days.
And so when I saw an account of his running, I smelt a rat. I came back and I watched him. As soon as I saw him crush and swallow a capsule as the gun was fired, I was sure and I got a hold of him. He was pretty stubborn, but he finally told me what name you were under now, and the rest was easy. I'd have got you in time anyway, but your bravado in telling us when you'd next operate gave me the idea of letting you do it and photographing you at work. That's all I have to say. Captain Sturdivant, you can take your prisoner whenever you want him.
I reckon without you, Dr. Bird, that the end hasn't come yet. You may send me up for a few years, but you'll never find that money, I'm sure of that. Professor, your safety deposit box in the Commercial National is already sealed until a court orders it opened. The bills you took this morning were all marked. That's merely additional proof if we needed it. You surely didn't think such a transparent device as changing your name from James Collier to John Collier, signing with your left hand instead of your right, would fool the Secret Service, did you? Remember, your old bureau records showed you to be ambidextrous. What about Winston's confession? Well, Detective Captain Sturdivant can explain that to a court when Mr. Winston brings suit against him for false arrest and brutal treatment. Replied Carnes. A very interesting case, Carnes, replied the doctor a few hours later. It was an enjoyable interlude in the routine of most cases on which you consult me. But our playtime's over. We'll have to get after that counterfeiting case tomorrow. Oh my. Is the issue already over? Golly gosh, we're already through the February issue as far as I can tell. It's telling me what's in the next issue. Well, there's an advertisement. And oh wow, there's like a bunch of vintage advertisements in the back of this. So, for those of you who don't know, I'm reading what essentially amounts to a magazine full of short stories called Astounding Stories of Super Science, and there's just a whole bunch of vintage advertisements just hanging out in the back of this magazine. It's really interesting. There's an advertisement to be a radio broadcast operator, paying $1,800 to $4,800 per year. Let's see what that looks like after inflation. This came out in say 1930. So inflation calculator. Let's look here. In February of 1930, $1,800 is $26,133 in our current time. That's interesting. I'll have to ask some of the radio and TV communications folk around here if that's still standard, or if the pay rate has gone up or down. That's interesting though. But regardless of all that, I'm gonna look at these. Vintage advertisements on my own time because they're really cool. But I don't think I can exactly read them and get them across. So, just give me a moment here, and we'll move on to the March issue of Astounding Stories of Super Science. Just a moment, there's tables of context I gotta go through, and we can move on to our next story after a short bumper. Everybody get up and stretch, it's been about an hour.
In Amherst University, I originally came here to study writing, but I've also decided to study theater and radio broadcasting. With the help of my passionate and dedicated professors, I've been able to develop all of my interests. Among the many opportunities I've discovered at St. Ambrose, I recently worked to Marcus, the school's creative writing journal. I also took a class in costume design that I like so much. I'm designing the costumes for a play next spring. When not in the theater, I'm usually in the recording studio, KALA, SAU's radio station, 88.9 favorite music. It's all been bigger and better than I ever expected at a school that's come to feel like home, and you too can be just as involved. Come discover what your future holds at St. Ambrose University.
That's right, folks. If you're a student at St. Ambrose University, you too can run your own radio show.
It's a real thing. You don't have to be a communications major. You don't have to be involved with anything radio and anything else radio and TV on campus. You can just come up here and request a time slot and say, hey, I want to do, I want to be on the radio from X time to Y time. And if the time slot's available, you can just totally do it. My first year here, I did a radio show a more traditional radio show than this Paper Cuts, in which I just picked music out of the big playlist they have here and just DJ'd for an hour. And this year, as part of a requirement for a class, of course, I'm doing this. I'm doing Paper Cuts, where I just read books for y'all for a good hour, 2 hours, usually 3 hours. But regardless of all that self-advertisement, let's get back to the story, shall we? And so we move on to the March 1930 issue of Astounding Stories of Super Science. And we have another short story by Captain S.P. Meek. It's called Cold Light. Ooh, I got a good feeling about that. Just judging by the title alone, I get the sense it's a freeze ray story, which I love me some freeze ray stories, Anyway. Oh, hey, it's another further adventure of Carnes, the Secret Service agent, and the Doctor. Oh my gosh, so let's continue. Confounded Carnes, I'm on my vacation. I know, Doctor, and I hate to disturb you, but I felt I simply had to. I had one of the strangest cases on my hands that I've been ever so mixed up in, and I think you'll forgive me for calling you when I tell you about it. Dr. Bird groaned in the telephone transmitter. I took a vacation last summer, or tried to, and you hauled me away from the best fishing I've found in years to help you on a case. This year I travel all the way from Wisconsin to San Francisco to get away from you, and the very day I get here, you're after me. I won't have anything to do with it. Where are you anyway? I'm at Fallon, Nevada, Doctor. I'm sorry that you won't be able to help me out, because the case promises to be pretty unusually interesting. Come on, let me at least tell you about it. Dr. Bird groaned louder than ever into the telephone transmitter. All right, go ahead, tell me about it. If that'll relieve your mind, but I've given you my answer. I'm not interested. That's quite all right, Doctor. I don't expect you to touch it. I hope, however, that you'll be able to give me at least an idea of where to start. You ever seen a man's body broken in pieces? Do you mean badly smashed up? No, I mean what I just said indeed. Broken in pieces. Legs snapped off as though the entire flesh had become brittle. No, I didn't, and neither did anyone else. I've seen it, Doctor. Huey, what have you been drinking? Operative Carnes of the United States Secret Service chuckled softly to himself. The voice of the famous scientist of the Bureau of Standards plainly showed an interest, which was quite at variance with his words. I assure you, Doctor, I was quite sober, and so was Hughes when we both saw it. Who's Hughes? He's an airmail pilot, one of the crack flyers of the Transcontinental Airmail Corporation. Let me tell you the whole thing in order. All right, I've got a few minutes to spare, but I'll warn you, I don't intend to touch this case. Very well, suit yourself, Doctor. I've got no authority to requisition your services after all. As you know, the TAC has been handling a great deal of transcontinental airmail, with a pretty clean record on accidents for that matter. The day before yesterday, a special plane left Washington to carry 2 packages from there to San Francisco. One of these was a shipment of jewels valued at $250,000. That's $250,000 in 1930s money, and we've just seen how much inflation has had an effect. That's a lot of money. Actually, do I still have the inflation calculator pulled up? Do I still have the... Oh, I do.
Let's find out. $250,000. That's $250,000. $250,000 is 3 million. 3 million, almost 3 3/4, 3.75 million. It's $3.62 million. That's a lot of money, folks. Anyway, there was a shipment of jewels valued at $3.6 million consigned to a San Francisco firm, and the other was a sealed packet from the War Department. Nobody was supposed to know the contents of that packet except the chief of staff, who delivered it to the plane personally, but rumors get out, as they do, and it was popularly supposed to contain certain essential features of the Army's war plans. As much as certain, the plane carried not only the regular TAC pilot and courier, but also an Army courier, and it was guarded during the trip by an Army plane armed with small bombs and a machine gun. I rode in it, after all. My orders were simply to guard the ship until it landed at Mills Field, and then to guard the courier from there to the Presidio of San Francisco until his packet was delivered personally into the hands of the commanding general of the Ninth Corps of the area. The trip was quiet and monotonous until after we left Salt Lake City at dawn this morning. Nothing happened until we were about 100 miles east of Reno, for that matter. We'd taken on some elevation across the Stillwater Mountains, and we were skimming low over them, my plane trailing the TAC plane by about half a mile. I wasn't paying any particular attention to the other ship when I suddenly felt our plane leap ahead. It was a fast Douglas. The pilot gave it the gun and made it move, I can tell you. I yelled into my speaking tube and asked what the reason was. And my pilot yelled back that the plane ahead was in trouble. As soon as it was called to my attention, I could see myself it wasn't acting normally. Excuse me. It was losing elevation and was pursuing a really erratic course. Before we could reach it, it lost flying speed and fell into a spinning nosedive and headed for the ground. I watched, expecting every minute to see the crew make parachute jumps, but they didn't, and the plane hit the ground with a terrific crash, where it caught fire, right? No, Doctor, that's one of the strange things about the accident. It didn't. It just hit the ground in an open place, free from brush, and burst into pieces, but it didn't flame up. We headed directly for the scene of the crash, and we encountered another funny thing. We almost froze to death. What do you mean, froze to death? I mean exactly what I say. Of course, it's pretty cold at that altitude all the time, but this cold wasn't like anything I'd ever encountered. It felt like our blood was freezing in our veins. It congealed frost on the windshield and made the motor miss for a moment. It was only momentary, and it existed directly over the wrecked plane, but we went past it and swung around in a circle and came back over the wreck, but didn't feel it again. The next thing we tried to do was to find a landing place. That country's pretty rugged and rough, and there wasn't a flat place for miles that was large enough to land a ship on. Hughes and I talked it over. There didn't seem to be much of anything we could do except go on until we found a landing place. I had had no experience in parachute jumping, and I couldn't pilot the plane if Hughes jumped. We swooped down over the wreck as close as we dared. That's when we saw the condition of the bodies. The whole plane was cracked up pretty badly, but the weird part of it was the fact that the bodies of the crew had broken into pieces as though they were made of glass. Arms and legs were detached from the torsos and lying at a distance. There was no sign of blood on the ground either. We saw all this with our eyes from close at hand and made a few more passes to verify it with observations through binoculars. When we made our observations and marked the location of the wreck as closely as we could, we headed east until we found a landing place near Fallon. Hughes dropped me there and went on to Reno or San Francisco if he needed to go that far, to report the accident and get more planes to aid in the search. I was at sea, but it seemed like it was in your line of work, and I knew that you were at St. Francis, so I called you up. What are your plans? Well, I haven't made any. I needed to talk with you first. The country where the wreck occurred's pretty wild, and we can't get near with it. You can't get near it with any other transportation other than donkeys. The only thing I can see to do is to gather together what transportation I can and head for the wreck on foot to rescue the packets and bring out the bodies. Can you suggest anything better? When do you expect to start? Well, as soon as I can get my pack train together. Possibly 3 or 4 hours. Carnes, are you sure that those bodies were broken into bits? An armor leg might easily have torn off in a complete crash. They were smashed into bits as nearly as I could tell, Doctor. He uses an old flyer, and he's seen plenty of crashes. He's never seen anything like this. Beats anything I ever saw. If your observations were accurate, there could be only one cause, and that one is patently impossible. I have a bit of equipment here, but I expect that I can get most of the stuff I want from the University of California across the bay at Berkeley. I can get a plane into Christie Field. I'll tell you what to do, Carnes. Get your burro train together, start as soon as you can, but leave me a half a dozen burros and a guide at Fallon. I'll get up there as soon as I can, and I'll try to overtake you before you get to the wreck. If I don't disturb anything any more than you can help until my arrival. You understand?
I thought you were on vacation, Doctor.
Oh, shut up. Like most of my vacations, this one will have to be postponed. I'll move as swiftly as I can, and I ought to be at Fallon tonight if I'm lucky and don't run into any obstacles. Burros are fairly slow, but I'll make the best time possible. That's what I was expecting, Doctor. I can't get my pack train together until the evening, so I'll wait for you right here. I'm mighty glad you're going to get in on it.
Silently, Dr. Carnes and Dr. Sorry, just give me a moment. I need to grab some water. I won't lie to you guys. This what is his name? Captain something. Just give me a moment. I need to see the chapter name. Yeah, we're on Cold Light. Captain whatever his name is. His name escapes me. We've read 2 of his stories in a row, and they're actually particularly good. I'll have to do some looking to see if this author writes anything more in the upcoming stories. Upcoming issues, rather. Anyway, I digress. Silently, Carnes and Dr. Bird surveyed the wreck of the TAC plane. The observations of the Secret Service operative had been correct. The bodies of the unfortunate crew had been broken into fragments. Their limbs hadn't been twisted off as a freak of the fall, but it's cleanly broken off, as though the bodies had suddenly become brittle and shattered on their impact with the ground. Not only the bodies, but the ship itself had been broken up. Even the clothing of the men was in pieces or had long splits in the fabric, whose edges were clean as though they had been cut with a knife. Dr. Bird picked up an arm which belonged to the pilot and examined it. The brittleness, if it had ever existed, was gone and the arm was limp. No rigor mortis. How long ago was the wreck? About 72 hours ago. What about those packets that were on the plane? Carnes stepped forward and gingerly inspected first the body of the army courier, and then that of the courier of the TAC. They're both gone, Doctor. Dr. Bird's face fell into grim lines. There's more to this case than appears on the surface, Carnes. This was no ordinary wreck. Bring up that third burro. I want to examine these fragments a little. Bill, one of the 2 guides who had accompanied them from Fallon, you and Walter scout around the ground and see what you can find out. I wish to know whether anyone's visited the scene of the wreck. The guides consulted a moment and started out. Carnes drove up the burro that the doctor had indicated, and Dr. Bird unpacked it. He opened a mahogany case and took from it a high-powered microscope. Setting the instrument up on a convenient rock, he subjected portions of the wreck, including several fragments of flesh, to careful scrutiny. When he'd completed his observations, he fell into a brown study from which he was aroused by Carnes. I'm assuming brown study is just, kind of like he just zones out and muses for a little bit. I'm going to Google that, actually. Brown study. Let's find out, folks.
Brown study. Brown study. A mood of deep absorption or thoughtfulness. Reverie. Gloomy meditation or melancholy is often known as being in a brown study. Huh. That's neat. That's a good phrase. Everybody write that one down. What did you find about the cause of the wreck, Doctor? I don't know what to think. The immediate cause was that everything was frozen. The plane ran into a belt of cold, which froze up the motor and probably killed the crew instantly. It was undoubtedly the aftermath of that cold which you felt when you swooped down over the wreck. It's impossible. There's no way. I can't believe it. There's no way it could have gotten cold enough to freeze everything up like that. It does, and yet I'm confident that that's what happened. It's no ordinary cold, Carnes. It was cold of the type that infests interstellar space, cold beyond any conception you have of cold, cold near the range of absolute zero, nearly 450 degrees below zero on the Fahrenheit scale. At such temperatures, things such which are ordinary quite flexible and elastic, like rubber or flesh, become brittle as glass and would break in the manner in which these bodies have broken. An examination of the tissues of the flesh, so that it show that it's been submitted to some temperature that's very low in the scale, probably below that of liquid air for that matter. Such a temperature would produce instant death, and the other phenomena which we can observe as well. What could cause such a low temperature, Doctor? I don't know yet, although I certainly hope to find out before we're finished. Cold is a funny thing, Carnes. Ordinarily, it's considered as simply the absence of heat, and yet I've always held it to be a definite negative quantity. All through nature, we observe that every force has an opposite or negative force to oppose it. We have positive and negative electrical charges, positive and negative or north and south magnetic poles. We have gravity and its opposite apergy. Excuse me? Apergy? What? Apergy? Apergy is a fictitious form of anti-gravitational energy, first described by Percy Gregg in an 1880 Sword and Planet novel, Across the Zodiac. Alright, so that's apparently a science fiction trope that has not been a thing anymore. Apergy. Apergy, 1987. First mentioned in 1880, then mentioned in 1894, 1896, 1897. S.P. Meek's short story Cold Light, March 1930. Apergy is mentioned. Gosh dang, Wikipedia, what's your deal? So this person's real name, he was an American military chemist. Sorry, I'm going to digress into the history of the author for a little bit. This person's real name was Sterner St. Paul Meek. He was an American military chemist. He was a children's author as well as being a science fiction author. He published much of his work as Captain S.P. Meek, and briefly as Major S.P. Meek, and then as Colonel S.P. Meek. He also published one story as Sterner St. Paul. He did a lot of stuff for, he wrote a lot of stuff for, like, science fiction serials. There's a ton of stuff in upcoming issues of Astounding Stories. He also wrote a couple things for a different serial called Amazing Stories. He wrote some stuff called the Atlantis series. He wrote a couple of collections of published short stories that are all by him. Then there's a bunch of children's novels. And then he wrote a non-fiction book on dealing with raising a puppy, which is a big left turn from this. Gosh dang, this is interesting. Yeah, most of his work is science fiction stories and short novels in pulp science fiction magazines, like Astounding Stories of Super Science, which we're reading. Most of them in his popular Dr. Bird and Operative Carnes series, like the one we're reading and the one we just read. That's cool. Like many early pulp science fiction writers, Meek used fiction to give detailed description of current and projected scientific advances. He utilized many of the contemporary science fiction's tropes at the time of the time, with the notion that atoms are miniaturized solar systems, for example. He was really popular among pulp magazine readers, with good reason. This is probably some of the better stuff that's come out of this magazine. Meek's stories were crudely executed in comparison to the. This is fully not my speculation. This is someone else. Someone else saying that his stories are crudely executed. The higher standards introduced with the golden age of sci-fi made them strictly historical interest. I would say they're not necessarily just historical interest pieces. I mean, yes, they're pretty trope sci-fi by now, just because like this kind of instills a lot of the tropes of the genre. But like, this isn't terrible. This is pretty similar to how I write, honestly, because I write a lot of sci-fi myself. If I'm going to write anything, and it kind of reads a little bit like an academic paper threw up on a young adult novel. In my case, this is more like a fiction, like a novel just threw up on an academic paper. More accurately, it's like an academic paper threw up on a novel. You just kind of you're going along telling a story, and then like a character will start talking or thinking, and it'll just go completely into like academic paper speculation mode for like a page, and then we'll like be oh shoot, I'm telling a story, back to the story, and I kind of write in the same way. But I won't promote my writing because I think it's pretty good, but also like I promote myself enough on here. By the way, a YouTube channel that exists that has archives of all this stuff if you like it. Speaking of self-promotion. Anyway, I digress a rather large amount, but we've learned something about our author. A lot of his stuff is like this, and he wrote a lot of early sci-fi. Anyway, returning to the story, our intrepid hero and the Secret Service agent that attends him are very confused at the circumstances of this plane crash, because mysteriously this plane just crashed for no apparent reason, at least to the observer, which was our secret agent here. And then they go over they get a little closer to the plane crash and realize the plane itself is shattered. And the agent is very confused, so he calls his doctor friend and says, "Hey, why are things shattering in the middle of the desert?" And the doctor's like, "I have an idea. I'm on vacation, so I'm going to help you very grumpily." And so we return to our story. Anyway, I don't know yet, although I hope to find out before we're finished. Cold's a funny thing, Carnes. Ordinarily, it's considered as the absence of heat, yet I have always held it to be a definite negative quantity. All through nature, we observe that every force has its opposite or negative force to oppose it. We have positive and negative electrical charges, positive and negative north and south magnetic poles. We have gravity and its opposite apergy, and I believe cold is really simply negative heat. I've never heard of anything like that, Doctor. I always thought things were cold because heat was taken from them, not because cold was added. It sounds preposterous. Well, such is the common idea, and it's held up by various theory, but I cannot accept it myself. It doesn't explain all the recorded phenomena. You're familiar with the searchlight, are you not?
In a general way, yes.
A searchlight is merely a source of light and, of course, of heat, which is placed at the focus of a parabolic reflector, so all the rays emanating from the source travel in parallel lines. A searchlight, of course, gives off heat. If we place a lens of the same size as the searchlight aperture in the path of the beam and concentrate all the light and heat at one spot, the focal point in the lens, the temperature of that point, is the same as the temperature of the source of the light. Unless what has been lost by radiation. You understand that, do you not? Well, certainly. Suppose we place at the center of the aperture of the searchlight a small opaque disc that is permeable neither to heat or light, in such a manner as to interrupt the central portion of the beam. As a result, the beam will go out in the form of a hollow rod, or a pipe of heat and light with a dark, cold core. This core will have the temperature of the surrounding air plus the small amount which is radiated into it from the surrounding pipe. If we now pass this beam of light through a lens in order to concentrate the beam, both the pipe of heat and the cold core will focus. If we place a temperature measuring device near the focus of the dark core, we'll find that the temperature is lower than the surrounding air. This means that we will have focused or concentrated cold. That sounds impossible, but I can offer no criticism. I mean, I'm just not quite sure. Nevertheless, regardless of its confusing setup and baffling result, it's experimentally true. It's one of the facts that led me to consider cold as negative heat. However, this is true of cold as it is of the other negative forces. They exist and manifest themselves only in the presence of the positive forces. No one else has concentrated cold except in the presence of heat, as I've outlined. How this cold belt which the TAC plane encountered came to be, there's another question. The thing which we have to determine is whether it was caused by natural or artificial forces. Both of the packets which the plane was carrying are gone, Doctor. Just to remind you. Yes, and that seems to add weight to the possibility that the cause was artificial, but it's far from conclusive. These packets might not have been on the men when the plane fell, or someone may have passed them later and taken them for safekeeping. The doctor's remarks were interrupted by the guides.
Someone has been found here since the wreck, Doctor. Walter and I found tracks when 2 men came up here and prowled around for some time. Then they left by the way they came. They went off toward the northwest, and we followed their trail for about 40 rods and then lost it. We weren't able to pick it up again.
Thanks, Bill. Well, Carnes, this just seems to add more weight to the theory that the spot of cold was manufactured. It didn't just happen. If a prospecting party had just happened along, they'd have either left the wreck alone or made some attempt to inter the bodies. That cold belt must have been produced artificially by men who planned to rob this plane after bringing it down, who were near at hand to get at their plunder. Is there any chance of following that trail?
I doubt it, Doc. Walter and I scouted around quite a little, but we couldn't pick it back up again.
Is there any power line passing within 20 miles of here?
None that I know. Walter and I know of, Doc.
Funny, such a device, as it must have been used, would have needed a lot of power for its operation. I'll try my luck. Carnes, help me unpack and set up the rest of my apparatus. So with the aid of the operative, Dr. Bird unpacked 2 of the burros and extracted from cases where they were carefully packed and padded some elaborate electrical and optical apparatuses. The first was a short telescope. Telecope. Can you tell I can't cope with my inability to pronounce words? The first was a short telescope of large diameter, which he mounted on a base in such a manner that it could be elevated or depressed and rotated in any direction. At the focal point of the telescope was fastened a small knot of wire, from which one lead ran to the main piece of the apparatus, which he sat on a flat rock. The other lead from the wire ran into a sealed container surrounded by a water bath under which a spirit lamp burned. From the container, another lead ran to the main apparatus. This main piece consisted of a series of wire coils mounted on a frame attached to the 2 leads. The doctor took from a padded case a tiny magnet suspended on a piece of wire of exceedingly small diameter, which he fastened in place inside the coils. Cemented to the magnet was a tiny mirror.
What in the world is that thing?
Asked Carnes as the doctor finished his setup and surveyed it with satisfaction. It's merely a thermocouple attached to a D'Arsenval galvanometer. This large, squat telescope catches and concentrates on the thermocouple, and the galvanometer registers the temperature.
Whoa, you're way over my head here. Let's start here. What's a thermocouple?
It's a juncture of 2 wires made of dissimilar metals, in this case of platinum and platinum iridium alloy. There's another similar junction in this case, which is kept at a constant temperature by that water bath. When the temperatures of the two junctions are the same, the system is in equilibrium. When there are different temperature and electrical potential set up, which causes a current to form and flow from one to the other through the galvanometer. The galvanometer consists of a magnet set up inside coils, through which the current I spoke of earlier flows. This current causes the magnet to rotate, and by watching the mirror, the rotation can be detected and measured. This device is one of the most sensitive of its kind ever made. It's used to measure the radiation from distant stars. Currents as small as point. How many zeros are there? 3, 6, 9. That's just incredibly small. Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 26 zeros. Point oh 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 1 ampere have been detected and measured. That's incredibly small, if you can't tell. This particular instrument is not that sensitive to begin with, as the sensitivity further reduced by having a high resistance in one of the leads. Okay, now I'm confused because he said it's the device he unpacked is one of the most sensitive, but the particular version of it. Oh, maybe there exists one that is the most sensitive, and it's measured that absurdly small amount of ampere, but this one is not that sensitive, I think is what he meant. Oh well. What are you going to use it for? I'm going to try and locate somewhere in these hills a patch of local cold. It might not work, but I have hopes. If you manipulate the telescope, please, as to search the hills around here, I'll keep an eye on the galvanometer. For several minutes, Carnes swung the telescope around. Twice Dr. Bird stopped him and decreased the sensitivity of his instrument by introducing more resistance in the lines in order to keep the magnet from twisting clear around due to the fluctuations in the heats received on account of the varying conditions of reflection. As Carnes swung the telescope again, the magnet swung around sharply, nearly to a right angle to its former position. Stop! Read your azimuth. Carnes read the compass bearing on the protractor attached to the frame which supported the telescope. Dr. Bird took a pair of binoculars and looked long and earnestly in the indicated direction. But with a sigh, he laid down the glasses. I can't see a thing, Carnes. We'll have to move over to the next crest and make a new setup. Plant a rod on the hill so we can get an azimuth bearing and get the airline distance with a rangefinder. On the hilltop, which Dr. Bird pointed out, the apparatus was again set up. For several minutes, Carnes swept the hills before an exclamation from the doctor told him to pause. He read the new azimuth. The doctor laid off the two readings on a sheet of paper with a protractor and made a few calculations. I don't know, he said reflectively when he had finished his computations. This instrument is still so sensitive you may merely have focused on a deep shadow or a cold spring or something of that nature, but the magnet kicked clear around, and it may mean that we've located what we're looking for. It's only 2 miles away and almost due west of here. Okay, so the deal with this instrument is it can be made so sensitive that it can detect that incredibly small amount of amperage, but by changing the amount of voltage in certain wires in the system, then it increases and decreases its sensitivity. And he's decreased the sensitivity such that it's useful to look for wavering in temperature. It's more standard of Earth than deep space. Anyway, returning to the story. There's no spring that I know of, Doc, and I think I know every water hole in this country. There could hardly be a spring at that elevation anyway. Maybe it is what we're looking for. We'll start out in that direction anyway. Bill, you'd better take the lead. You know the area around here. Spread out a little, so that we won't be too bunched if anything happens. And so for 3/4 of an hour, the little group of men made their way through the wilderness in the the direction indicated by the doctor. Presently, Bill, who was in the lead, held up his hand with a warning gesture. The other three closed up as rapidly as cautious progress would allow. What is it, Bill? Slip up ahead and look over that crest. The doctor obeyed the instructions, and as he glanced over, he gave vent to a low whistle of surprise and motioned for Carnes to join him. The operative crawled up and glanced over the crest, and in a hollow before them was a crude one-storied house. And erected on an open space before it was a huge apparatus. It consisted of a number of huge metallic cylinders, from which lines ran to a silvery concave mirror, mounted on an elaborate frame, which would allow it to be rotated as to point in any direction.
What is it?
Some kind of projector. I've never seen one quite like it, but it's meant to project something, judging by the... Well, I can't quite make out the curve of the mirror. It isn't a parabola, and it's certainly not an ellipse. It must be a high degree subcatenary, or else built on a transcendental function. He raised himself to a clearer view, trailing off. As he did so, a puff of smoke came from the house, followed in a moment by a sharp crack, as a bullet flattened itself a few inches from his head. Oh, don't do that. Sorry, my phone likes to make noises sometimes. The doctor tumbled back over the crest out of the side of the house, and Bill and Walter hurried forward, their rifles held ready for action. Get on the flanks, men. That man we want is in the house in that hollow. He's armed and he means business. Bill and Walter crawled from under the shelter of the rocks to a short distance away, and then, rifles at the ready, advanced to the attack. A report came from the hollow, and a bullet whined over Bill's head. Almost instantly, a crack came from Walter's rifle, and splinters flew from the building in the hollow a few inches from the loophole through which projected the barrel of the rifle. The rifle barrel swung rapidly in a circle and barked in Walter's direction, but as it did so, Bill's gun spoke, and again splinters flew from the building. Good work! If we just had rifles, we could join in the party, but it's a little far for effective pistol work. Let's go ahead, and we may get close enough to do a little shooting ourselves. Pistols in hand, Carnes and the doctor crawled over the crest and joined the advance. Again and again the rifle spoke.
Hello, Carhorn. Thank you for interrupting.
My favorite. Anyway, pistols in hand, Carnes and the doctor crawled over the crest and joined the advance. Again the rifle spoke from the hollow, and was answered by the vicious barks of the rifles in the hands of the guides. Carnes and the doctor resting their pistols on rocks, and sending an occasional bullet toward the loophole. The conditions of light and the moving target weren't conducive to good marksmanship on the part of the besieged man, and none of the attackers were hit. Presently, Walter succeeded in sending a bullet through the loophole, and the rifle barrel suddenly disappeared. With a shout, the four men rose from their cover and advanced toward the building in a run. As they did so, an ominous whirring sound came from the apparatus in front of the house, and a sudden chill filled the air. Back! Back below the hill if you value your lives! Shouted Dr. Bird. He turned and raced at full speed toward the sheltering crest of the hill, the others following him closely. The whirring sound continued, and the concave reflector turned with a grating sound in its gears. As the path of the ray struck the ground, the rocks became white with frost, and one rock split a sharp rapport, one fragment rolling down the slope, carrying others in its trail. With panic-stricken faces, the four men raced toward the sheltering crest, but remorselessly, the reflector swung around in their direction. The intense cold numbed the racing men, cutting off their breath and impeding the efforts for speed. Stop! Fire at that reflector, it's our only chance! He set the example by turning and emptying his pistol futilely at the turning mirror. Bill, Walter, and Carnes followed his example, and nearer and nearer to them came the deadly ray. Bill was the nearest to its path. He suddenly stiffened and fell forward, his useless gun still grasped in his hands. As his body struck the ground, it rolled downhill for a few feet, the deadly ray following it. His head struck a rock, and Carnes gave a cry of horror as it shattered into fragments. Walter threw his rifle to his shoulder and fired again and again at the rotating disc. The cold had become intense, and he couldn't control the actions of his muscles. His rifle wavering about. He threw himself flat on the ground, and with an almost superhuman effort, steadied himself for a moment and fired. His aim was true, and with a terrific crash, the reflector split into 1,000 fragments itself. Dr. Bird staggered to his feet. "It's out of order for a moment. Quickly, storm the house while we can." As swiftly as his numb feet would allow him, he stumbled toward the house. The muzzle of the rifle again projected from the loophole, and with its crack, the doctor staggered for a moment and then fell. Walter's rifle spoke again, and the rifle disappeared through the loophole with a spasmodic jerk. Carnes stumbled over to the doctor. "Are you hurt badly?" "I'm not hit at all. I just stumbled and fell. Look out, he's going to shoot again." The rifle barrel came slowly into view this time, through the loophole, and Walter fired, but his bullet went wild. Carnes threw himself behind a rock for protection. The rifle swung in Walter's direction and paused. As it did so, from the house came a strangled cry and a sound as if of a blow. The rifle barrel disappeared. The sounds of a struggle came from the building. "Come on," cried Carnes as he rose to his feet, and he made his stumbling way forward, the others following at the best speed which their numbed limbs would allow. As they reached the door, they were aware of a struggle which was going on inside. With an oath, the doctor threw his massive frame against the door. It creaked, but the solid oak of which it was composed was proof against the attack, and he drew back for another onslaught. From the house came a pistol shot, followed by a despairing cry and a guttural shout. Reinforced by Carnes, the doctor threw his weight against the door again, and with a rending crash it gave, and they fell sprawling into the cabin. The doctor was the first one onto his feet.
"Who are you?" asked a voice from one corner. The doctor whirled like a flash and covered the speaker with his pistol.
"Put him up!"
"I'm unarmed. Who are you?"
"We're from the United States Secret Service," replied Carnes, who had gained his feet. "The game's up for you. You better realize it."
"The Secret Service? Thank God! Get Koskov. He has the plans. He's gone out through the tunnel."
"Where is it?"
"The entrance is that iron plate on the floor."
Carnes and the doctor jumped at the plate and tried to lift it, without result. There was no handle or projection on which they could take hold.
"Not that way. That cover's fastened on the inside. Go outside the building. He'll come out about 200 yards north. Shoot him as he shows up, or he'll get away."
The three men nearly tumbled over each other to get through the doorway into the bitter cold outside. As they emerged from the cabin, the gaze of the guide swept to the surrounding hills. "There he goes! Get him!" Walter ran forward a few feet and dropped prone on the ground, cuddling the stock of his rifle to his cheek. 200 yards ahead, a figure was scurrying over the rocks away from the cabin, and Walter drew in his breath. His hand suddenly grew steady as his keen gray eyes peered through the sights. Carnes and the doctor held their breath in symphony. In symphony, no, just timpani. Definitely that's how they held their breath. No. Carnes and the doctor held their breath in sympathy. Suddenly the rifle spoke, and the fleeing man threw up his arms and fell forward on his face. "You got him. Go bring the body in, Carnes. I'll take care of the chap inside."
"Did you get him?"
said the voice eagerly, as the doctor stepped inside. "Well, he's dead, all right. Who the devil are you, and what are you doing here?"
"There's a light switch on the left of the door as you come in."
Dr. Bird found the switch and snapped on the light. He turned toward the corner from whence the voice had come, and recoiled in horror. Propped in the corner was the body of a middle-aged man, daubed and splashed with blood, which ran from a wound in the side of his head. "Good heavens! Let me help you!"
There's not much use. I'm about done in. His face wound doesn't amount to much, but I'm shot through the body and I can feel it. I'm burning. I'm bleeding internally."
you try to move me, it'll kill me. Just leave me alone until your partners come. The doctor drew a flask of brandy from his pocket and advanced toward the corner. Take a few drops of this. With effort, the man lifted the flask to his lips and gulped down a little of the fiery spirit. A sound of trampling feet came from the outside, and then a thud, as though a body had been dropped. Carnes and Walter entered the cabin. He's dead as a mackerel. Walter got him through the neck and broke his spinal cord. He never knew what hit him. The plans? Came a gasping voice from the man in the corner. Well, we got them too. He had both packets inside his coat. They've been opened, but I think they're all here. Who are you? Since Korskoff is dead and I'm dying, there's no reason why I shouldn't tell you. Leave that brandy handy to keep up my strength. I've only got a short time. I can't repeat myself. As to who I am or what I was, it doesn't really matter. Korskoff knew me as John Smith, and it'll pass as well as any other name. Let my past stay buried. I am, or was, rather, a scientist of some ability. If fortune frowned on me, I was driven out of this world. Money would rehabilitate me. Wouldn't do anything nowadays, so I set out to get it. In the course of my experimental work, I discovered that cold was negative heat, and reacted to the laws which govern heat.
Well, I knew that, but I could never prove it.
Who are you? Dr. Bird of the Bureau of Standards. Oh, Bird. I've heard of you. You can understand me when I say that light, that is heat. Positive heat's a concomitant of ordinary light. I found that cold, negative heat, is a concomitant of cold light. Is my apparatus in good shape outside?
The reflector is smashed.
Well, I'm sorry. You would have enjoyed studying. I presume that you saw it was a catenary curve.
I rather thought so.
It was. It was also adjustable. I could vary the focal point from within a few feet to several miles. With that apparatus, I could throw a beam of negative heat with a focal point I could adjust as well. Close to the apparatus, I could obtain a temperature almost down to absolute zero, but at longer ranges, it wasn't so cold due to leakage in the atmosphere. Even at 2 miles, I could produce a local temperature of 300 degrees below zero.
What was the source of your cold?
Liquid helium. The cylinders contain, or did contain, I suspect Korskoff has emptied them, helium in a liquid state.
Where's your compressor?
Well, I didn't have to use one. I developed a cold light under whose rays helium would liquefy and remain in a state of equilibrium until exposed to ordinary light. The cylinders merely had enough pressure to force the liquid out to where the sun could hit it, and then it turned into a gas, dropping the temperature at the first focal point of the reflector, for absolute zero. When I had this much done, Korskoff and I packed the whole apparatus here and were ready for their work. We were on the path of the transcontinental mail, and I bided my time until an especially valuable shipment was to be made. My plan, which worked perfectly, mind you, was to freeze the plane in midair, and then rob the wreck. I heard of the jewel shipment the TAC was to carry, and I planned to get it. When the plane came over, Korskoff and I brought it down. The unsuspected presence of another plane upset us a little, and I started to bring it down, but we'd been all over this country and knew there was no place a plane that could land. I let it go on in safety.
Well, thanks,
replied Carnes with a grimace. We robbed the wreck and found 2 packets, one of the jewels that I was after, and the other a sealed packet, which proved to contain certain water package. That was when I learned who Korskoff was. I hired him in San Francisco. He's a good mechanic, no principles. He was to get 1/4 of the loot. When he found these plans, he told me who he was. He was really a secret Russian agent. He wanted to deliver the plans to Russia. I might be a thief and a murderer, but I'm not going to betray my country. I told him so. He offered me any price for the plans, but I wouldn't listen. We had a serious quarrel. He overpowered me and bound me. We had a radio set here. Called San Francisco, sent some code message. I think he was waiting here for someone to come. If we followed our original plans, we would have been miles away from here before you arrived. You see, he had me bound and helpless, as he thought, but I worked my bonds a little loose. I didn't let him know it. I knew the plane that I had let get away had guide a party here. I thought I might be able to help out. When you came and attacked the house, I worked at my bonds until they were loose enough to throw off. I saw Koskov start my cold apparatus to work and then he quit because he ran out of helium. When he started shooting again, I worked out of my bonds and tackled him. He was a better man than I gave him credit for. Or perhaps he just suspected me. For about the time I grabbed him, he whirled and struck me over the head with his gun. He tore my face open. His blow stunned me. When I came to, I was thrown into this corner. I meant to have another try at it, but I guess you rushed him too fast. He went for the tunnel, but as he did so, he shot me through the body. I guess I didn't look dead enough for him to shoot him. You gentlemen broke open the door and came in. That's all. That's all. That's where we are now. Not by a long shot, it isn't. Where's the cold light apparatus of yours?
In the tunnel.
How do you get into it?
If you open that cupboard on the wall, you'll find an open knife switch on the wall. Close it.
Dr. Bird indeed found the switch, and he closed it. As he did, the cabin rocked on its foundations, and both Carnes and Walter were thrown to the ground. The thought of a detonation deep in the earth came to their ears.
What was that? What was that? That was the detonation of 200 pounds of TNT. When you dig down into the underground cave where we used the cold light apparatus, you'll find it in fragments. It was my only child. I'm taking it with me.
As he finished, his head slumped forward on his chest, and with an exclamation of dismay, Dr. Bird sprang forward and tried to lift his prostrate form. In an agony of the moment, the doctor tightened his grip on the dying man's shoulder, but Smith collapsed into a heap. Dr. Bird bent forward and tore open his shirt and listened to his chest. And presently he straightened up. He's gone, and I guess the results of his genius have died with him. He doesn't strike me as a man who left over much to chance. Carnes, is your case completed? Well, very satisfactorily, Doctor. I do have both of the lost packets, after all. All right, then, come back to the wreck and help me pack my burros. I can make my way back to Fallon without a guide. Where are you going, Doctor? That, Carnes, is none of your blankety-blanked business. Permit me to remind you I'm still on vacation. I haven't decided yet just where I'm going, but I can tell you one thing. It's going to be someplace where you can't call me on the telephone. Alright. So that, I think that's a good ending off point for things this week, folks. Next week, we will come back with Brigands of the Moon, the book of Greg Haljan. It's the beginning of a 4-part novel by Ray Cummings. Golly gosh. A whole 4-part novel? Are all 4 parts going to be in this month's issue?
Find out next week on Paper Cuts. Same bat time, same bat channel. And hey, if you missed the live radio show, we have archives. They exist. Go look up Glacier Nestor on YouTube. That's Glacier Nestor, as in Nest ER. The archives are on YouTube. There's at least 7 whole episodes full of action-packed stories for you to listen to.
Anyway, my cheesy announcer voice aside, that's been Paper Cuts, folks. I'm gonna just turn it back to music here. The next 3 songs coming up, for those curious, is "Don't Call Me Up" by Jamaican Queens, "I Feel Everything" by Waters, and "The Wrong Year" by the Decemberists. That third song is very good, so I would suggest staying tuned in for that one. Thanks for your time, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed the stories this week, because I certainly